This is Professor John McKinney. I'm currently in Rotterdam, Holland, and we have a really great video coming up. So let's dive into it.
Hey everyone. So this week, what we're going to be talking about is the role of human resource management. So we're going to be specifically talking about all the various learning objectives that are associated with Chapter 2 in our text. So for this video, we do have another special guest with us. And this person, I met them several years ago at a conference, and I really enjoyed the passion that he specifically brings to the human resources industry with what he does. So with that being said, I will let Dan introduce himself.
My name is Dan Enan. I am a HR professional for, say, 25 plus years. And I've come through the ranks from the basics of just writing memos and doing customer service all the way up to being an HR director for a decent sized recreational company. I will say what I like most about HR is that I can see an impact every day, whether it's customer service or investigations, disciplinary procedures, professional development. Every day I can see a impact in the things that I do, and that applies equally from like being a guy who takes phone calls and writes memos all the way up to being an HR director where you can actually impact policy, you can positively affect a company, but you still have the chance every day to positively affect people, like individuals. And I think that's the human part of human resources is, are you impacting people? Are you making a positive change? And I really love that.
I'm really excited to have you joining me on this video. So let's get to our first topic.
How can human resource management reinforce organizational culture?
I think this is something that's been near and dear to my heart for a while, is organizational culture, period. And how how an HR professional or human resources management generally, I think, can impact organizational culture is by setting the standard. I think if you, from the time that I first came, because I started in as a military HR person, and I started in an organization that had very high standards. And so when I saw, hey, HR is like the standard bearer for that organization, like you have to not only know what the standards are, but toe the line and demonstrate those standards on a daily basis. I thought that was really cool. I was like, well, yeah, people look at me and say, hey, he's doing the right thing, so I should. It can be kind of a pain because also you're like, oh, you can't be slipping because uh hey, HR, I saw HR smoking outside of the smoking area. Oh, we're gonna get them. That can be a pain in the butt too, but also it's a it's a point of pride, I think. So you're setting the standard, you're enforcing the standard. Like even in a civilian sense, like when I was with the NOC, for example, we know we're working with those hiring managers to set the standards for who they should be hiring. So we might be more permissive with who we allow into the organization, but we know if they don't meet our expectations for an outdoor recreation company, for example, like you have to have a certain like level of, what's the word I'm looking for? You have to have a little bit more casual personality than you would in a more corporate environment, for example, right? So we know, hey, hiring managers, these are the people that we're looking for. That's what's going to make us successful as a company, and that's part of our culture.
How can human resource management support high performance work systems?
Human resources supports high performance work systems by aligning HR practices with company goals and objectives, ensuring that everyone in the whole organization is working towards those same objectives. A lot of times we hire the right people, provide ongoing training, and set up management performance systems to keep those employees motivated and focused. Human resources, it involves employees in the decision making process. We also manage compensation and rewards to recognize great work. And then we also design jobs to be engaging and fulfilling. So human resource management, it works to maintain a positive work environment by addressing the concerns and making sure that everyone in the organization feels valued. Overall, this approach, it helps employees perform at their best, and it ultimately contributes to the company's success.
What are 5 standards that help decide if action is unethical?
To figure out if something's unethical, you can really use about 5 main standards to be able to look at that. One of the first standards is that you can look at the utilitarian standard, which looks at whether or not these actions do the most good for the most people. There's also the rights standard, which checks to see if the actions respect everyone's basic rights. The justice standard, it focuses on whether the action is fair and if it spreads benefits or burdens equally. The common sense standard, it considers if the actions help society overall. And then the last standard is the virtue standard. And what that does is it sees if the actions match up with the values like honesty, integrity. And these standards, they can be used to help you decide if an action is ethical, really based on its impact, its fairness, its respect for rights, any social benefits, and moral values that there are.
How can human resource management influence ethics and corporate social responsibility?
All right. So if I had to think about how human resources managers influence ethics and corporate social responsibility, I'd say it's very similar. It is to how we reinforce culture. We have to educate those employees, right? We have to say these are what our expectations are. So in that employee handbook, you have expectations of ethical behavior. You might have considerations of how, like, what kind of employees we hire, how accepting how we show our acceptance of different lifestyles, different personalities, and stuff like that. And so we have to educate them via the employee handbook, of course, but also by onboarding and also by, as I was saying before, consistently representing that to the company. So we have to show equal, equitable treatment to everyone in alliance, in a not alliance, in accordance with our ethics and our social responsibility. Getting an ethical culture first, you have to determine what is the goals, like what are the organizational objectives, right? And you're saying our organizational objective is to accomplish as much profit as possible. Sure. But we also want to do so in a way that protects the company from liability, that protects our employees from harm and legal issues. And that's where we incorporate that into our ethics.
How can human resource management support organizational change?
I mean, can support organizational change in a lot of ways. I think one of the things that really sticks out to me is because I consider myself a people person. I love people and connections and networking. I think that's one of the ways that I have supported organizational change in the past. Like we were doing a organizational restructure of a 1,500 person organization right before I left the military, and everyone is resistant to change at some point or another. Nobody likes when their established norm is changed. And so there were some people who had been in that organization for quite a long time that were like, oh no, like they're changing what our organization looks like. Everything's going to be different. And they were very resistant to that change. And one of the ways that I helped as an advisor to the command is what we were doing. An executive advisor position I was in, was just go talk to them and say, hey, like the world is changing. There are best practices that we can incorporate that will make our organization more successful. And you just got to trust that we know what we're doing at this executive level. And using our interpersonal communication, using our connections and ability to talk to people is a huge part of that, I think. So it's connections, it's communication, but it's also like we're the people that those organizations come to make sure that they're doing stuff correctly, right? So if we're saying, I would know that I want to restructure this organization, but I want to make sure that we plan it and we execute that plan in such a way that is not affecting our performance as an organization. Like that's where HR comes in as well. Like one of the things I also did was like project management, and that's part of that is planning and executing a change on a large scale. During that organizational change, it's important that we understand what the employees need. So not just to be successful, but continue doing the great work that they're doing, but be able to adapt to the change. What are we going to do to make sure that those employees get what they need, their expectations are met? And I think communication is huge. This is one of the things that some organizations miss at when it comes to organizational change is just saying, like I was saying before, like, hey, this is just what we're doing, adapt. If you can communicate to somebody why that works best, why this is the change that we need to do, and get them on board with that, I think that that's a huge part of organizational change. And finally, you just got to train them on new processes. So yeah, our organization is changing. The way that information is going to flow, for example, the software that we're using is going to change. Don't worry, we'll take care of you. We are human resources. We're going to provide you the training you need. We'll be here as resources for you to make sure you get through this change. And I think that's the biggest thing in any change, in my opinion, is that communication, that understanding, because it helps engender commitment. So we got planning and execution, communication, and getting those employees the training that they need to successfully change. I think those are the biggest ones.
What are Hofstede's 5 cultural dimensions and how might they influence HR management?
Hofstede's 5 cultural dimensions, it help explains how culture affects HR practices. So the first one that we're looking at is power distance. And what this does is it measures just how much people defer to authority. So if there's a high power distance in the culture, they typically have strict hierarchies, and you don't see a lot of engagement between people in higher positions interacting with people more like entry-level roles. While, organizations or cultures that have low power distance, those are more, interacting with each other, and it doesn't matter exactly which role you're in. Another thing that we look at is, does the culture, is it individualism or is it collectivism? So that shows if the culture values, personal success, which is more individualistic, or if it values the group goals, which is more of like a collectivist mentality. We also look a lot of times at masculinity versus femininity, which indicates whether a culture prioritizes, competition and achievement, which is tied to the masculine area, or if cooperation and care is, more of what's valued and prioritized in that culture. Hofstede's dimensions, it also looks at uncertainty avoidance. And what that does is it reflects how much a culture avoids uncertainty. So a culture with high uncertainty avoidance, it prefers to have clear rules, while a low certainty avoidance, it's a culture that wants to be a lot more flexible and not necessarily have such strict rules and procedures. And the last thing that we look at with Hofstede's 5 cultural dimensions is, the mindset of long-term versus short-term orientation. So that shows if a culture, it values long-term planning or if it values more quick results. In these dimensions, they really help shape how HR practices are designed and ultimately used in different cultures, whether it's in a business setting or if you even work in an international company where you are dealing with different national cultures in the work setting.
How do employees influence the success of a merger or acquisition, and how can HR management create the foundation for success?
So employees are the key to making a merger or acquisition successful. Ultimately, because their buy-in or enthusiasm, it can really affect the outcome in either a positive way or really a negative way. And human resource management, it can help by, clearly communicating the challenges, the changes, offering support and training, and also carefully planning how to blend, these two teams to really fit into one company culture. So ultimately, getting employees involved in the process and recognizing their efforts, it boosts morale. And by doing these things, human resource management can make the transition with a merger or an acquisition smoother, and it increases the chances that these that the mergers, that they will succeed. So I hope that you've enjoyed, hearing Dan and I talk about the learning objectives for the chapter in the textbook. And that's really all we have for this week. So, still make sure to read your text. This video does not replace reading the actual chapter in the textbook. And we'll see you again next week where we will talk about the next chapter.